Jubilee is back at it again with another video, this time one conservative versus 25 LGBTQ activists. And in this video, I'm going to critique the first 15 to 20 minutes of this because I find the conversation to be just kind of like inflammatory, clickbaity, and it doesn't get into some real concerns that people may have on same-sex marriage. Now, before I begin, I just want to say that there seems to be this idea that Michael Knowles, the conservative commentator, is in fact an academic on these issues. And I'm not saying that he's not an academic, or at least well-researched. Actually, no, he's not an academic. Michael Knowles is not a trained academic. He's actually trained as an actor, and he's a political commentator, and I think he has like a highly viewed podcast and YouTube presence. But taking Michael Knowles as the conservative argument against same-sex marriage, I think is intentional because he does say inflammatory things that I don't even know if he truly believes, because as we'll see in this video, he gets challenged quite a bit, and I notice that he sometimes like smirks or he smiles when he's actually challenged. And in this video, I'm going to try to pick it apart and hopefully get to where I think the conversation could have gotten to on same-sex marriage. So let's begin.
Claim is that there is no such thing as same-sex marriage.
Certainly an inflammatory claim.
Wow.
Nice to meet you.
How are
Michael.
you, sir? Nice to see you.
I'm doing well. So your claim, what's the underlying philosophy of your claim?
Well, I guess the underlying historical part of my claim is that everyone for all of history everywhere until, and I'm being generous, 2001, agreed with my view that there's no such thing as same-sex marriage.
Wait a minute. So this is something that Michael does throughout the debate. He makes these generalizations that every civilization everywhere since the dawn of time up until 2001 have not believed in same-sex marriage, and that's just not true. Now, I'm not saying that there are communities that actively promoted same-sex marriage, because I don't know if there's enough evidence for that either. But we know that the idea that marriage between a man and a woman has existed since time immemorial is just not true. I mean, every emperor ever that existed engaged in some form of polyamory or polygamy, and that was very normative. And I would actually argue that polyamory and polygamy was probably far more common across cultures in the upper echelons of those cultures. And that to me seems to be the through line through many cultures, polyamory and polygamy for the upper echelons of the elite ruling class. Now, when it comes to marriage, and I need to be very specific here, and I wish Michael started with a clear definition of marriage. Marriage in the Judeo-Christian sense is between a man and a woman, and I wish he started by contextualizing the discussion with that clear definition and its roots, because this idea that marriage as we understand it today is similar or exact in every other culture is just not true at all.
So it seems to me that marriage intrinsically requires sexual difference. And furthermore, I think that any claim that marriage could be redefined to include same-sex marriage would render the term marriage incomprehensible.
Would you say that this is based off of natural law and how Thomas Aquinas defines natural law?
There's a good natural law argument for it, but I think it's based on more than that.
It's
based on anthropology.
Well, then would you say that marriage is a set of legal rights, or is it a social rule?
I think marriage is an institution. I think it's the fundamental political institution. I think, getting back to classical philosophy,
Of course.
that man is fundamentally a social animal. So, I think at the bedrock of politics is the unit of the family. And, of course, intrinsic to the family is marriage.
For all of those,
See, I wish he would contextualize it with the Judeo-Christian understanding of marriage.
especially with natural law, is just an assertion without evidence to back that claim, in that we see marriage over time in various cultures has been different things.
In which cultures would you say you see same-sex marriage?
I did not say same-sex marriage particularly, but the role of it when it comes to family, when it comes to the conditions. Because would you also say that if somebody is lawfully married?
I think what Michael may have a point here is saying that where same-sex marriage is actually promoted within a culture and engaged with. I think perhaps what the respondent here could say is Marriage, marriage did not always exist between one man and one woman. There were different relationships, sexual, intimate, between all types of different genders, in different cultures. So Michael may have a point in saying that same-sex marriage wasn't promoted, but the counter could be, well, what may not have been promoted, but this idea that one man and one woman was the only thing that ever existed is also not true.
Especially in the eyes of the church, they cannot be divorced and then married again.
Well, I oppose divorce and remarriage, but I'm making a more modest claim than that. I'm just saying that at its core, marriage necessarily involves two different sexes.
But how would you prove that? Because all of natural law is just this assertion. I can just as easily say the opposite, in that marriage is a set of legal rights.
You keep bringing up natural law. I'm actually speaking even more basically. I love natural law, but I'm speaking even more basically than that. It seems to me that the only way that marriage could have a meaning is if it involves different sexes.
But once again, you're defining that meaning. But marriage essentially is a set of rights conferred from two spouses when it comes to inheritance, when it comes to the rights of the children, when it comes to a number of about 1,100 federal and state rights.
Okay, then what you're getting at is interesting and might help us move forward. How would you define marriage?
I would say marriage is a legal contract between individuals when it comes to a set of property laws, when it comes to family law, when it comes to children, and many other rights that are conferred. And
That's actually a pretty good definition in today's day and age.
we do see that those rights have been conferred to members of the same sex. And so say that same-sex marriage does not exist is not true because we see it.
Well, you say that marriage entails rights pertaining to children. Well, two men cannot create a child.
But neither
So this Michael then dovetails into children, but I'll let this play.
can
cannot
infertile
create a child.
couples, and neither can, there are a number of couples that cannot have children,
Sure. So infertility sometimes occurs, and that's
and
unfortunate.
so does gay marriage.
Well, no, gay marriage cannot occur. I guess
But you're asserting that without
it's kinda
proof.
weird.
We see that it does happen in that
No,
the
it
word
doesn't.
that we mean marriage.
you
and
could
the legal rights.
you could say that there's such a thing as a square ball. You could say
See, this is where I think it dovetails a little bit. Now, I'm going to keep letting this play, but Michael actually had a potential opportunity there to shift the argument. You see, he's rightfully being called out that it's his opinion on gay marriage or same-sex marriage not existing. That's his opinion. And I think the definition that this person put forward is actually legit. Like it's a legal arrangement. Michael gets a bit hiccuped there, and then he goes back to having children. If children is the basis for marriage, then one may argue with our declining birth rate and our declining replacement rate here in Canada and in the United States. Actually, I don't think it's true in the United States. But with declining birth rates throughout the G7 and the G20, one may argue that if that's the case, then what would the purpose then be of marriage if married couples aren't having children? And that would be a good counter argument to Michael. But anyways, I'll keep letting this play.
say that, but a
you're
square ball
asserting that
doesn't
it's a
really exist.
contradiction. Would
No,
you
no,
agree that
no, no.
people have been lawfully wedded in the eyes of the government, and those two parties are members of the same sex?
No, I'm saying that isn't possible. So laws can assert all
But you're
sorts of crazy
asserting
things.
that without
Well,
proof.
like the law could say that a black person isn't a human being, but that wouldn't be true. That wouldn't make it true.
But once again, when we get into this Aristotelian view of the world, that's an assertion. Would you agree?
You're bringing up Aristotle. I don't know. I'm not bringing up Aristotle.
Well, would you say
No, I
that,
like Aristotle.
that Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, in the traditional view of the magisterium of the Catholic Church, are a view that you use to base your worldview off of?
I am Catholic, but marriage actually even predates the church. So I guess my view is
Yes.
your definition of marriage seems to get a little muddled. You say it's a legal arrangement
legal
of
arrangement,
family, but to
yes.
say that marriage is a legal arrangement pertaining to family is circular. Of course, it's a legal arrangement pertaining
I'm
to family.
saying
I'm
it's
saying, what
a
is
legal
it?
arrangement.
When you say it's an arrangement that pertains to children, you say, well, of course, okay, now we're getting closer because only a man and a woman can produce a child in principle. Now, of course, some couples are infertile, but just because a human being, let's say, loses an arm, doesn't mean that human beings only have one arm or
But you're
might have
saying that
three
it's
arms.
I'd love to know if what Michael would say to the couples that are willingly choosing not to have children, that are lawfully married, between a man and a woman. What his assumption would be, because it seems like he's very much like you get married to have children, but again, there's so many couples who are not having children. I wish that was brought up in this discussion.
A
We're discussing
necessary
what the
component. And that necessary component doesn't come from anywhere.
No. Well, I'll give you my definition of marriage.
Absolutely.
I think marriage is a lifelong union between a man and a woman ordered toward the procreation and education of children, and as a secondary matter for the mutual support of the spouses.
But once again,
Okay, so that definition is very, it is a definition, but it's not one that would be based in legal jurisprudence. It would actually be based on faith and religiosity, which is nothing. No, there's nothing wrong with that. That is Michael's perspective, but it's not a position that I think could work in a society with multiple denominations, right? Like, it's a faith-based understanding of marriage.
when we say ordered towards, is to look at the world with these preconceived notions about things.
I'm not preconceiving anything. I'm just observing
certain
nature as it
things?
is. No, I'm just observing nature, and I'm saying that that's what marriage is.
But if we're
Just
observing nature,
Yeah, I
we
don't
see
get
that
that.
there are same-sex couples. So if we go, we are observing
no, I'm not
things,
saying there can't be same-sex couples. I'm just saying there can't be same-sex marriage.
are
So this is where, again, Michael doesn't seem to understand like human nature. He draws in human nature. Like, if we were to truly allow human nature to happen, then polyamory and polygamy would literally be the normative union that would not be reserved to the elite class in ancient times, and perhaps even now. Polygamy and polyamory would be much more widespread. And folks, I just want to couch that with the fact that, here in Canada, we legalized same-sex marriage in, I believe, 2006. The Supreme Court ruled on it. 2006, the Supreme Court ruled on it. We also made sure that polygamy and polyamory were illegal. They're still illegal here in Canada. So this idea that marriage was redefined for same-sex couples, to me, the argument is, well, then why was it not redefined to include polygamy and polyamory? Right? So this is the thing about redefining marriage that I often wonder why we don't talk about more. It's the redefinition of marriage to include same-sex couples, but to not include polygamy and polyamory. So we're still making a judgment. By the way, here in Canada, if you are a religious leader, you can still deny a same-sex couple from getting married inside your institution because it is your religious freedom that you're exercising. So there's some nuances to the same-sex marriage court case here in Canada that we need to really unpack. Again, sometimes I feel like people make this a bit about like us versus them when it doesn't need to be. The other question I have for this is, what about civic unions? Here's an argument, like, couldn't same-sex civil unions or civic unions be treated the same as a marriage? I mean, the same legal rights, the same legal protections, etc. Why was it so important that same-sex marriage, as we understand marriage to be in a Judeo-Christian sense between a man and a woman, why was that so important to be included? And I think it's the legitimization of same-sex marriage and making it legitimate by making it marriage. But then again, the question then becomes, then what about polygamy and polyamory? And some would argue that, well, there's a man holding women, against their will and marrying a bunch of women. In some cultures and religions, polygamy and polyamory is very much a normative action. It's a normative way of understanding relationships between men and women. So it begs the question, and especially here in Canada, we're becoming more multicultural, and I just wonder, how this will continue to morph. Once you start redefining marriage, the institution of marriage, then it begs other questions associated with it. But we'll keep, again, I wish the conversation with Michael went there, but it didn't. But we'll keep letting this play.
Are there same-sex individuals that have entered into a legal contract that the state recognizes as a marriage?
Sometimes the state gets things wrong,
This
as
is where he
I am
kinda messes
arguing.
up.
But
has
is that
happened
a
in the
yes?
case of
Is that a
same-sex
yes? That
marriage.
there are couples of the same sex that have been wedded in the eyes of the state?
Since 2015,
Mhm.
the U.S. government pretends that two men can be married to each other.
But you're
Since-
basing off of that nothing. You're basing
Yeah.
that off of nothing.
No, I'm basing it off of the Obergefell decision from the Supreme Court. They're pretending. They're acting as if two men can marry
According
each other.
to you?
No, according to the Supreme Court in the Obergefell decision.
We keep using
before
pretend as if things exist outside of the institutions that we make.
That's a good point.
I'm just saying the word has a meaning, and I gave you a very clear definition of what I think it means and what statistically everyone for all of human history everywhere has thought it means.
See, that's the thing about Michael's acting background. He's very convincing about a very wrong opinion. There's literally no data that we could ever find to show that every civilization ever in human history ever supported a man and a woman getting married.
And you've given me this kind of jumbled description that keeps contradicting itself. And that's my whole point, is I think it is not possible to define marriage. I have nothing against two fellas.
According to who?
Prove me wrong.
Prove you wrong. Once again, are there couples in the U.S. that have entered into a covenant that society views as marriage?
Well, some people in society view it as marriage, but many do not.
But you aren't the ones conferring rights to society.
Right, but I don't think that...
See, this is the thing. Like, again, the argument that, like, some view it and some don't, you know, it's a circular argument. There are institutions, to this person's point, that have conferred rights to same-sex couples. Again, I think the argument could be, why not civic unions versus a Judeo-Christian redefinition of marriage? Why could that not have been part of the discussion, or was it not? Like, that to me should have been the debate of this entire debate. Or the point
government
of the
dictates reality. I think that if the government came out and passed a law and said that human beings are people with 3 heads and 17 arms and octopus tentacles.
This is where, like, I think Michael loses a lot of ground with me, because what I notice when he gets challenged, he goes back to, like, the square ball or the human with 3 heads, or, like, he goes back to these, like, nonsensical arguments to prove his point, and that tells me that he himself may be struggling with the structure of his argument.
And so we decree the U.S. government. That wouldn't make it true.
But who defines marriage?
You've been voted out by the majority.
Nice to meet you.
A pleasure to meet you.
Good job.
So I just want to say before we get to the next person that, you know, Michael is a trained actor, and it comes across in his responses, his mannerisms. It comes across in how he's performing in this debate. Again, to me, he's sharing his personal opinion on marriage, it's his opinion. But he's not grounding it in a real debate about the redefinition of a Judeo-Christian understanding of marriage. And he's not talking about civic unions, which I don't know if that's purposeful, because it's just, to me, it's sounding more and more inflammatory. But again, we'll keep letting this play.
Close.
Hey, good to meet you, Mindy.
Mindy, nice to meet you.
Yeah. Oh, my name's Mason. But
Mason.
Good to meet you. Yeah.
I'm Michael.
Oh, gotcha. Wait, do you have a birth certificate?
Not on me, but I do have one.
Okay. Well, I can't confirm that your name's Michael until I see that birth certificate, just as a defender of objective truth. But we can go more into the prompts.
I absolutely hate the arrogance that I see from both on the left and the right, but it's just so arrogant, and it just cuts people at their knees, and it doesn't allow people, like, to truly engage. And I hate that. It's so upsetting.
About
you could actually, if you have faculties of reason, and you say, well, this is the sort of
and
fellow
now
who
it's getting,
presents
like, super arrogant, you know, for no reason.
himself, in a credible way. And you've probably checked with the producers here; they've probably verified that I am who I am. So a reasonable person would be able to know who I am.
That is more performative characteristics. Is that what you're implying?
Yeah.
Is that I'm able, with my faculty of reason, to assume that I'm speaking with the man in front of me? And therefore I can just politely go with the name that you're presenting to me, almost as an act of respect?
No, I just think that I wouldn't have gotten in this building if I weren't really who I say I am. So
okay.
On both sides.
that would be my deduction.
Well, bringing back to the prompt,
Going back to specifically same-sex marriage.
you said you argued from an anthropology? That's like your basis of...
Yeah, men and women are different, and marriage involves one of each. Yeah.
What specific culture are you referring to? Because we have so many cultures that have communal relationships in which people are raised. When you said in the act of procreation, have you ever heard of it takes a village to raise kids?
But
that's not something that's just a saying.
No, I didn't say
it happens literally in specific cultures.
No, but when I say procreation, that's the act of creating the child. And usually there aren't 3 or 4 people involved in that. It's usually 2 people.
Yeah, but even those people that do create the child, oftentimes were referred to as different genders depending on the culture that it is that you're observing.
Which cultures are you referring to?
See, this is where I was with Mason up to a point, but then he kind of goes off the rails.
We could talk about the Mayans. We could talk about certain Amazonian cultures. I recognize that they're not Western cultures, so you might not prioritize them. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist.
This is the arrogance that I really don't like. The idea that, you're not prioritizing the Amazonian or Mayan communities. There's nothing that Michael has said up to this point that I would say has indicated as such. This is where, again, I think those who engage in this kind of, like, emotive-based response gets away from a real honest conversation, which is the better argument Mason could have made is we cannot say every culture in the history of humanity had marriage between a man and a woman. There's no definitive research that shows that, and there never will be. Full stop, period. And that would cut Michael at his knees and say, show me the studies of every culture that ever existed that marriage was between a man and a woman. You can't. So let's just move past that point.
Well, they no longer exist, the Mayans.
Oh, right, because of colonialism. I'm glad that you're just.
But what was their view of gender?
It's arrogance.
What specifically are you referring to?
That's specifically a social characteristic that we're all performing in right now. I mean, you can't say.
No, I'm not asking your opinion. I'm asking what you brought up. The Mayans. What did the Mayans think?
That's just something that is.
But what did the Mayans think? You brought it up. You seem so confident about this. What did the Mayans think about marriage and gender?
What do you? We can talk about.
See, this is where Mason really messed up. So I don't agree with, anyways, all that to say, when you're engaging in a debate and you bring something up like the Maya and you can't back it up, you kind of, it's a debate. If you're going to bring up something, you have to be able to stand back on it.
About difference in the way that
they Michael knows this, and now he's
I don't know that you know the difference. You said there was a difference, but you haven't explained how there was a difference. And I think this is what people do a lot.
Wait, is this prompt specifically on the Mayan anthropology?
Okay, I'm trying to drill down.
Because
just when you say there are different understandings of marriage throughout history and time and space, I say, okay, maybe that's possible. How? Tell me, point to the examples. And you said, well, the Mayans. And I said, okay, well, what did the Mayans think about marriage? And you don't have an answer. And none of these people have answers because everyone has. Do you have an answer?
People can look up right now. If you're right Google,
this is Mason shouldn't have brought this up.
Right. Michael's trying to hone me down on trivia night right now.
No, I'm just
right
asking you to explain.
Trying to talk about specifically our examples.
I'm asking you to explain the point that you brought up.
Yeah.
And so what people usually do is they say, well, look, I'm sure that there were all different types of marriage throughout history all over the world. And what I'm telling you is, there actually hasn't been.
So you're telling me that a Catholic priest are the people who
this is a perfect opportunity for Mason to say to Michael, like, okay, so you're telling me definitively that throughout history there have never been any other type of relationships between men and women that are marriage that qualifies marriage. And and if Michael says no, there haven't been, then I would say to Michael, like, okay, then pick your emperor, pick your dynasty, and I will show you countless women that man had as part of his relations. I think Emperor Qi in China was actually buried with all the women that he engaged with. Like, it's madness, Genghis Khan. I mean, the list goes on. And it's not to say every dynasty and every emperor had that relationship, but like many did. And that right there shows that polygamy and polyamory were very common, especially amongst elite ruling classes in many empires throughout the world.
Like a certain ceremony within the Mayan culture. Is that what you're telling me?
I'm not telling you that. I'm telling you that if you want to listen, I'm happy to tell you exactly.
I'm listening. Ears are open, Michael.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mindy.
For all of history, everywhere in the world until roughly 2001 in the Netherlands, every single culture, every polity has believed that marriage is the union of a man and a woman ordered toward the procreation of children. And that's what it has always been.
You're saying that's the specific objective of what marriage is?
Because that's what
thousands of years, marriage has been used for property transfer. That's what marriage
is also. It's also used for the mutual support of the spouses, but it is in principle ordered toward the procreation of children. That's what distinguishes it from other kinds of relationships.
Would you say that there's an aspect where love is important, specifically within this culture? Would you say that you love your wife?
I do, but now
well, that always hasn't been the case, specifically when it comes to things like
there are plenty of people today who don't love their wives.
That's absolutely true.
I suppose the difference,
as I just mentioned, that love has not always been something that's recognized, and even in some couples
we love people in relationships that are marital and in relationships that are not marital. We sometimes don't love our spouses. We sometimes don't love people who are not our spouses.
I think the point of what this conversation, Michael, is we're seeing different motivations in which people actually get married.
But I'm not asking about motivations.
It doesn't have to be specifically for the procreation. It doesn't have to be specifically for property transfer. And in some instances, it can just be the union of people who care about each other.
Okay,
and the fixation and the obsession of same-sex couples.
I care about
just what's so weird, specifically when conservatives claim to be big, strong men, cigar salesmen that are out there presenting this certain image. It's weird how you're focusing more on gay people than oftentimes gay people focus on gay people.
So I think sometimes Mason is like deferring, because I do think that there's a robust conversation that needs to occur on this that hasn't happened. And this is why 20 plus years later, here in the United States and Canada, people are still debating same-sex marriage. Now, I do think that most people agree with same-sex marriage. But again, I pose the question, why redefine Judeo-Christian understandings of marriage? Why not engage in civic unions? And I think the counter to that would be, well, that's delegitimizing same-sex marriage. And to that, I would say, well, then the whataboutism starts, right? Like, then what about, like, polygamy, polyamory? Are we delegitimizing polygamy and polyamory? And people would say, well, no, like, people kind of scoff and laugh at that argument. But I would argue that there are religions and cultures that engage in polygamy and polyamory that by its very nature is illegal. And don't you think that infringes upon their religious rights and cultural rights and freedoms? Now, again, it's a circular argument. I get that. But at the same time, that's where I think the conversation needs to go. I don't think that we should just full stop not talk about same-sex marriage. I think we should talk about it, but do so in an evidence-based manner that's not getting so emotive as Mason's kind of showing.
I'm not focusing on anything. I'm not the one who changed the definition of marriage.
You came in here making the claim, hey, all of these marriages that I'm seeing are not legitimate.
No, I'm saying they're not marriage.
My feelings.
No, because that's just not what marriage is. Like if you told me that there were such a thing as a square ball.
Yeah, the ball that we're referring to is a yellow ball and a green ball. It doesn't mean that the ball is square.
Now where I think we're confusing our analogies. The reason one can't have a square ball is not because one has an animus against square balls. It's because it's in the nature of spheres and squares that one cannot simultaneously be both.
The fear isn't seeing a gay marriage and saying, oh, boo, oh my God, I got scared. The fear is, oh my God, my rights are being taken away, or the institution of marriage is degraded, specifically because we're expanding it to people who also love each other.
So this is where something that I've seen a lot of people say is that my rights are being taken away. The right that's being conferred to you is on the basis, again, as I understand Judeo-Christian understanding of marriage, is between a man and a woman. Marriage itself, as I understand it, is between a man and a woman. So the rights are on the basis of that. To say that rights are being taken away from you means that the marriage had already been defined before to include same sex. This is why there was that push for redefining marriage to include same sex couples. But again, I argue, and I mean, but then I argue, then what about other relationships? We're redefining marriage, but we're still defining marriage, if that makes sense.
It's because even in principle, two fellas can't make a baby. That's the difference.
As we mentioned, there are people that are infertile that you wouldn't say their marriage is any less legitimate,
in principle, their marriage is inclined toward the procreation of children.
That's not true.
This is where
there were certain instances where marriage is used as a property transfer. It's not for procreation.
But again, it's also used
any of his marriages were illegitimate.
I would because I'm a Catholic, but that's a separate issue.
Gotcha.
This is the issue. I love my buddy, right? I love my Aunt Gertrude. I love my cousin.
You see how Michael does this?
I'm not married to them. I have lived with roommates. I wasn't married to them. Many people have slept with people who are not their spouses. That doesn't mean they're married to them. Marriage has to have a definition that is different from all of these other kinds of relationships. And the only one that anyone throughout all of history until roughly 2001 in the Netherlands has ever come up with is that it's a union of a man and a woman inclined toward the procreation of children. And also it so happens that children are raised in a much better way.
So Michael makes a comment that a man and a woman would be inclined to have children, and I would challenge that because it's, again, the declining birth rate is a real thing. It's been declining since the 1970s, and I would argue that people are not getting married on the basis of having children. I don't know how many couples are getting married to not have kids, but I wouldn't say that there are many out there that are saying, I definitely want to have children, that's why I'm getting married. So again, that's what I would point to Michael's point. And then the last thing he said was, what did he say? He said something along the lines of, let me just read.
From a man and a woman.
Not from motivation.
I love my buddy, right? I love my Aunt Gertrude. I love my cousins, but I'm not married to them. I have lived with roommates. I wasn't married to them. Many people have slept with people who are not their spouses. That doesn't mean they're married to them. Marriage has to have a definition that is different from all of these other kinds of relationships. And the only one that anyone throughout all of history until roughly 2001 in the Netherlands has ever come up with is that it's a union of a man and a woman inclined toward the procreation of children. And also it so happens that children are raised in a much better way from a man and a woman.
This is a specific motivation that you continue to reiterate and parrot. That is just not true if you look at various examples. Good to meet you, Mindy.
Good to meet you. What was his name? I didn't catch it. That was easy. You got it. How's it going?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. So I am not in this politics world. To be honest, all I know about you is your name is Michael, and you don't marry your cousins.
I don't.
Which is great.
I don't. I avoid
Okay.
that.
So I was taking some notes here on my handy dandy notebook.
Okay.
You're making a lot of appeals to things, appeal to nature, appeal to the dictionary, appeal to the past.
Philosophy.
Yeah.
Anthropology.
I feel like what you're ultimately appealing to is Michael's idea of marriage.
Yes.
And that's fine, right?
Yes.
But
I'm appealing to everyone else's idea of marriage for all of history.
It's not.
Well, so here's the thing. Haven't there, before, I don't get sidetracked here, but briefly to respond to that, weren't there other ideas in the past that were bad?
Well, there are plenty of ideas in the past that have been bad and discarded. There are very few ideas that have existed everywhere for all of history and continue to exist today, albeit in a slightly different form, that are bad.
So,
right?
but why am I supposed to care that people have believed something for a long time?
Well,
That's actually a
because,
really good point. Like, it's really hard to convince somebody to believe something that has existed for a really long time. The best argument against that would be, if something has existed for a very long time, like a noble truth or something, like a sacred truth, chances are enough people have questioned it and have found out the hard way that doing the other thing has not been the path forward. And so this is true with religion. A lot of people question religion, but it still persists. And religiosity, I know it's gone up and down, it's fluctuated. Some people say it's going down. I don't know if that's necessarily true, because in many parts of both Canada and the United States, religiosity is still pretty relevant to a lot of people, and young people too. So, I think that would be the argument. Why should you care about something that has existed for so long? Is because enough people have tried their best to kind of throw as much against that teaching, and still they're very religious.
Often things that have endured forever everywhere do so because they work or they have some tethering to reality. But in this case,
in terms of reality, I'm glad you mentioned the word reality, because in terms of reality, I'm gay married. Ooh, right? Like we live in a society where, if you look at polling data, society seems to be okay with gay marriage.
One thing I don't like about Jubilee is they go to these, like, you'll see when they do these fact checks, they go to like Gallup and all these things. Now, it's important that we look at, and I wish they did this in the fact check here, but they should have put an asterisk saying, like, who was polled and like when the poll was done, etc. Because support for same-sex marriage, I'm not saying that most people don't, but it all depends on who you're polling and where you're polling, etc., etc. And I'm sure it fluctuates as well. I don't know if 69% of Americans have supported same-sex marriage consistently year over year. So a better fact check would tell us when it was done, who was polled, who wasn't polled, and again, a trending chart of support for gay marriage. I would actually rather a trending chart over 20 years of support for same-sex marriage to help fact check this point.
So if you personally don't want to get gay married, you don't have to. But shouldn't we? I mean, I think, like, what is the point of this conversation?
Because you're not really married. You have a relationship with a man, but you're not really married.
I understand that you think that, and that's fine. But we should structure, because what's the point of this conversation, right? Like, I was kind of falling asleep through all, like, the Plato and Socrates and Italy.
I didn't bring it up. That was the other guy. That wasn't me.
I know. And we'll agree on that, okay? There's the agreement for the thumbnail, all right? But, like, the point of this conversation
I can make it very practical for you.
That we're deciding how we should conduct ourselves,
yes,
right?
I can make it very practical for you. Children do very poorly when they are raised by two men or by two women.
Now, this is an argument that is quite slippery for Michael to introduce, because there is research on both sides, but more than that, I can point to numerous studies of low-income families engaging in domestic violence, etc., marriage between a man and a woman, and the outcomes for those children are nowhere close to, quote unquote, a healthy relationship in a middle class, upper middle class family with a man and a woman. So economics play a big role. It's very challenging to make that argument, because the research isn't robust enough, and it's not comparing accurate data sets to come to that conclusion.
My understanding of the literature on this is that that's not true.
What literature are you referring to?
Unfortunately, I was not able to bring notes here. If you look it up after,
I don't have notes either, but I'll tell you.
You can reach out to me after. I can
Okay,
email it
but
to you.
I can-
We're getting off of my point here.
That's a
I
good
don't
point.
like it,
I
so I'm
think-
going to keep talking now.
I think it's
so.
you want it to be
need
practical,
do,
and you want to avoid.
We're just
the
going to
important
talk over
point.
each other. No
I
one's
don't-
going to
we don't need-
understand anything.
we don't
You
need
talk
to
so
talk.
much more than me.
I
You're the hero. Let me talk. Come on, Michael. Let me talk. So,
If you want to avoid the point I'm making, which probably is good for your side of the argument.
okay, if it's good for me, I'm going to do it. So. We need the point of this conversation is we're deciding ultimately like what should our laws be,
Yes.
right? If we live in a plutocratic society where a lot of people
Well, it
have a
shouldn't be
lot of
plutocratic. You mean pluralistic?
pluralistic. Thank you. See, I'm not a media guy. I'm just a guy. Why am I here? He's a professional. Pluralistic. Thank you, Michael. So we live in a pluralistic society.
Yeah.
And we should have our laws allow people to live the way they want insofar as we're not impeding on other people's liberties or harming others, right? To my understanding,
So what about the right of a kid to have his natural mother and father? Because when the rubber meets the road
This
in
is
gay
where
marriage,
it gets a bit
it's
odd.
not just two people living together. You could always do that. It's not two people doing those things you guys do that you could always do that.
That's weird.
It's the ability to adopt children, and in some cases, acquire children by going to the baby store and purchasing the eggs of one woman, renting the womb of another woman, and raising children, depriving them intentionally of their natural mothers, and that's very wrong.
So here's
and that
the
does
thing,
infringe
Michael.
on the rights of kids.
I understand that you believe that.
And all the
majority-
scientific literature, by the way, backs that up.
That's not true.
It is true.
Fact check that, please.
It is true. The study.
So fact check says National Institutes of Health, numerous studies have found that children raised by same-sex parents fare just as well as kids raised by different sex parents. Again, there's just too much unknowns there that we need to delve
fact
into.
check that on
I'm
the
happy.
video
I'm
and
happy to
progress
fact.
with the
I'm happy to fact
conversation.
check it for you right now.
No.
The study that you're referring to is the Michael Rosenfeld study out of Stanford in 2010, and it said that kids
okay.
raised in gay households did just as well in
It's
school as the
not
other
a
kids.
study.
And that it was a major study.
No,
but
you
it was
okay,
wrong. It had a
but
major
let me-
methodological error, and it's
I
been
would love
corrected
to-
by multiple other
I
studies.
would love to engage with you on that in a
Would
sec.
you? Would you?
Yes, in a sec.
I think you would not
my
like to engage
my
on that.
point is the majority of people in society are okay with these things. And society's laws should reflect what the majority of people are okay with.
The
And if
majority
you-
of people were okay with slavery for much of the 19th century. So should society's laws just reflect that?
Wait, so now
So this is, and I'm going to stop it here because I think this is like, I actually did like Greg's points here because I thought he raised coherent points. But my whole thing with Michael is that he's sharing his opinion on marriage and he's not getting into the nitty gritty of same-sex marriage and redefining marriage. He's talking about his opinion about marriage. And I think that does a great disservice to a real debate. I know they put up a poll saying 69% of Americans agree with same-sex marriage. Again, I'd like to know more. It's still a very hot button topic. And again, I think it is still quite divisive for many in Canada and the United States. Which is why, again, our Supreme Court here in Canada carved out religious freedoms and did not allow polygamy and polyamory. In fact, that was a very important point to the Supreme Court decision here in Canada. And so I think that by avoiding those topics, it makes these kinds of debates clickbaity. Again, like I said at the beginning, Michael is a trained actor. He is not a researcher. He's not an academic. He's read a lot on these topics, 100%, but he's a trained actor. And so he knows what gets clicks. He knows what gets likes. He knows what gets views. I viewed it. Some of you might have viewed it. And that's where I think Jubilee's doing a disservice to a very important debate that may still be happening across our countries. And I think the reality why so many of us don't talk about this issue is because we feel like the debate is settled. And I just don't believe that. Now, some criticize me for raising these topics when it seems like it's settled and society has moved on from these topics. I truly don't believe that some of these debates are ever settled. Because society tends to, or some people in society tend to say things and it galvanizes a group of people to say, yes, I always thought that. We never were engaged. We were never properly consulted. And I believe that. And that's the problem. I don't think we were ever truly consulted on same-sex marriage. And I think that more and more needs to be discussed about the difference between same-sex civic unions versus same-sex marriage and the redefinition of marriage. Why are we not including other forms of marriage, other types of arrangements between consenting adults? I mentioned polygamy and polyamory. I'm certain that there are others. And that's what the redefinition of marriage opens ourselves up to. Why limit it to same sex? Why not engage in other forms of marriage, other forms of civic unions between consenting adults? So I'm going to leave that there with you to kind of chew on, talk with your friends. Let me know what you think, but definitely comment below. Let me know what you think about this. I kind of like commenting on these debates because I do think that they're done in a very specific way, but there's a way to move this conversation forward that's actually kind of respectful. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comment section below.